Mhm. All right. So hello, everybody. Happy Friday. So if you're here, please turn on your cameras and don't forget to mark your attendance. Glad to see you all. Just a quick announcement. So two things actually. So I posted the link for the review guide on Blackboard. So please check if you could access the Google Doc I uploaded the link to. And to remind you, yes, the second exam would be next Friday, the Friday right before spring break. So that's first. Second, I have an urgent, not super urgent, but an urgent sort of meeting today. And so we're going to cut the lecture short for a little bit, so like 50 minutes short. And then there would be like a mini lecture, i.e. a 15-minute lecture uploaded to Blackboard to make up for that. So I'm going to upload it, and then it would have also like two attention check questions embedded within. So make sure you watch it at least by next Monday, because Monday will just keep continuing or building upon what we're talking about today. Um, so yeah, that's for the announcements. And so yeah, let's continue. All right. So to remind you, we were talking about ethnographic research last time on Wednesday. And so ethnographic research is observational research. And that's the one used where the researcher is actually a participant in the setting or environment of the research participants, in which the methods to collect data is not asking people to tell you about themselves, but actually observing and see what they do by yourself as a researcher, right? I think we showed different examples, we showed different case studies. We talked about like the principles, taking field notes and whatnot. But then the big question is like how you then look at the data. Ethnographic data is like so immense in any given study, because as we said before, it will include field notes, it will include the researcher's impression, observations, it would include ethnographic interviews or conversations with the sample in that ethnographic study. It would include information about like the environment, the settings, all of that. So how do you come up with um, analyzing ethnographic data, right? So for that, we would use something called descriptive framework. And when we say framework, so remember, like, so when you say frame, forget about framework. Like if you're drawing a picture, you want something like to basically hold it together. Like this is the part of a picture you need to look at within a specific frame. So framework is basically the template by which you're going to apply your analysis. And frameworks, we recall, like in ethnographic research, are the ones who would give you some specific instructions about the things you should report and how you report them, right? Let me give you a very quick example. So, how many of you have traveled abroad, like outside the United States? Okay, so we have two. So, Evelyn, where did you go?
I've been to a few different places. Do you want me to give like one
Yeah,
specific?
just one.
Um, France.
Yeah, okay. So, but like, did you go to Paris? Okay. So yeah, so that's one example, right? So assuming, yeah, I task Evelyn was saying, uh, go and live in Paris for like 6 months, right? Then come back to us and report how France or how Paris is different than the United States or San Diego, right? The most difficult question, I think, Evelyn would say, where should I start, right? Like, what do you mean by how different? Like, I'm going to talk about the architecture, going to talk about the weather, you're going to talk about transportation system, the traveling, the airport, like food, prices, rent, the like entertainment, day life, nightlife, people, culture, customs, like demographic diversity. Like, what exactly going to talk about? Because if I compare everything in France to everything in the United States, that would be like an impossible task. Like, I'm going to talk like economics. So, in such studies, when someone is doing that, they would need a framework. And that is to say, okay, you would then focus on here is some theoretical framework. Let's say, for example, there's one called the speaking framework, which we're going to show in a minute. Or we can say, for instance, that we're going to look at like uh, the human like interaction between strangers in public spaces, like interactions of public spaces between two cities, right? And so let's say it's Paris and DC, Washington DC. So we compare two capitals, right? And so you're only going to focus on that, like how do people, or like how do individuals in a public space interact with one another? And then you would then have a like framework of like what categories of uh, or like themes and interactions we have. So, for instance, like I'll tell you, look at three things. So, eye contact. So, do people make direct eye contact with strangers in Paris as compared to the United States? Like positive facial expressions. How frequently do people smile when they talk to strangers, right? And maybe a third one would be, let's say, body language and like which one are more interactive. And then maybe the idea of like what's the right level or like pitch or noise of the voice, right? Because in different culture, some cultures you're expected to speak very loudly. Some cultures are more calm when they talk, especially in public spaces, right? So, like, those are four categories, like metrics by which you could compare two things. So that's what we mean by a framework of analysis. You go to somewhere, right? You go to the look at how people are using washing machines, or you're looking at street vendors. There are things that in which you would analyze your data against, and that's we call framework. So that's one. Another one is like called rules, or like look at rules of different places. So if you want to describe a place, you could look for the rules of interaction between or among individuals in that setting, and how speaking between one another is computed. So, for instance, if you're looking for rules within, let's say, a restaurant, okay, so we have the waiters, we have the workers, we have the line cooks, we have the store manager, we have the chef, right? How does like the communication style is affected by the role each individual is playing within that restaurant institution? So looking at rules of individual within an environment is also something that you're going to see in ethnographic research. And again, it's the idea of like I am trying to give you some insights or data within a framework you can grasp, right? So you can have like a full theoretical framework. We're not going to study framework per se for this, but for this class, but this is an example of one famous framework for ethnographic research called the speaking framework. And speaking is an acronym. So they say in whatever environment you go to, say Paris, France, or like Tijuana, Mexico, or San Diego, California, you describe the setting or the scene, so the physical scene, the participants, the individuals, people, ends, that is to say the goals. So why does X does Y? Like what's the purpose of X doing Y? Right? Like what are their end goals are. That sequence, right? So if I'm trying to, for instance, if I'm trying to go from point A to point B in Paris, or like if I'm trying to go to school, what are the sequences of actions that do like a typical citizen of Paris take, right? So that will tell where do they get, for example, their cards for the subway or the metro, as it's called, right? Like, or like if you want to purchase, let's say, you want to like connect Wi-Fi to your house. What are the acts or the procedures that you're able to do that? So that's a fourth one. Fourth one is key. Fifth one is key. That is to say, who are the key actors and institutions that will allow you to complete that act or task. So the institution that issue or like the company that has the Wi-Fi devices, and maybe the authority that would authorize you to use Wi-Fi. So like key players or key individuals or key institutions. Uh, Instrumentalities is like whom do you use? So in of course like instrumentality of money or like instrumentality of individual. So what can like $100 or €100 do for you in one place versus the other? Norms, that is norms means like the customs, like how you expect it to behave within a given environment, within a given community, within a given society, right? So how you expect it to sit, how you expect it to address that stranger, how you expect it to talk to a professor or someone like superior to you or one of your like subordinates in a company. What are the social norms that govern that? And genre, and that is to say the different um, genre here in the sense of lifestyle or professional categories. So if you're doing something for fun, how is it different when people try to do something for work or like something to socialize? That's what they mean by genre. So this framework would allow you then to analyze whatever community you're going to. Like, okay, here are like eight things I should look at, and that would give my readers a full picture of that community that or environment that I investigated. Now we're switching gears to talk about advantages and disadvantages of ethnographic research. So some of the advantages, and we've mentioned that before, is like ethnographic research is more richer in terms of data. That is to say, you could see more nuance or more context about the participants. So, as we've shown in the video I played on Wednesday, if a researcher is investigating or like researching street vendors in the city of New York, you're not they won't only talk to those street vendors, but will also capture the full environment in which they live in. They will look at their interactions among one another and to the residents, to the customers, to the authorities, to the city, to the police, to different institutions, blah blah blah. And so it's more richer. It gives you like verbal part, expressed part, non-expressed part, implicit parts. So you get like a 360-degree view of the situation. Uh, Secondly, and we mentioned that in the video we watched, though was mentioned the video we watched on Wednesday, sometimes people cannot articulate some of their opinions, and sometimes they don't, even if they can articulate them, they don't reveal them. So if you remember the when that gentleman from the company was talking about like dialysis machine, and basically users were struggling to find a place in which they could place a sheet of paper like on a straight surface to write down things, and it's not a problem that they thought could be solved by the product design, right? So the people themselves could not articulate that problem to the company representatives, but when the research team went in and like saw what people were struggling with, they then discovered like this is something that we could fix. So the idea is observing someone could actually help you see some of the problem they have, even when they cannot reveal it. And we also mentioned that there are things that people don't reveal by nature. So if I make an interview with college students and ask them about their performance or satisfaction with remote learning, they could tell me a few things, and probably most of them would be true. But there are things they would try to hide consciously and subconsciously, right? So, like, what do you do? What else do you do when you're in a Zoom classroom, for instance? Like, what activity do you do afterwards, or like how your habits have changed, or like things that happen, let's say in the house you're in. There are things that you won't reveal by nature. So theoretically, if you do ethnographic research, you can observe the natural environment and see some aspects of reality, whether or not people would be willing to say them in an interview or like in a direct interaction or not, right? Um, Secondly, and this is more importantly, it's supposedly capturing like a natural occurring behavior or like an environment that is not manipulated. And so if I go, as going back to the example, so I'm talking about what Parisians would think about talking to strangers in public space. Um, I could run a, like for example experiments by which I bring in someone from Paris and someone from DC and put them in different rooms and see how they would talk to strangers. Or I could go and see myself like how within that community those interactions naturally occur. If I'm the one who's doing the observations of public squares of Paris, I'm not manipulating how people are interacting with one another, right? I'm getting a clear and direct measurement or observation of that phenomenon. Right? So there's less opportunity for manipulation, so to speak, ideally speaking, right? If either like manipulation by the participant themselves, that is to say, they wanna change or tell you something else than what they originally do, or by the observer. So that's about like it capture what people do in an actual setting instead of what they say they do or what they would do in an artificial setting. Okay, and finally, it shows the group dynamic of an environment, and this is similar to the earlier point, right? So I want to see, for instance, like how, for instance, like roommates cope with those Zoom classes, right? Because if you live with three individuals in one house and you have four different schedules, if I do an ethnographic research on that, I could see how each one react to the behaviors and actions of the others, or the circumstances of the others within that household. So I would not only get the individual views of each one, I would see the interactions among them. And you can apply that to whatever environment one is studying within an ethnographic research framework. However, there are some disadvantages. So, to ask you a question, though, what would be the most obvious limitation of observational research? So, in other words, with someone is when you know that someone is observing you, do you always act naturally?
No, you would sometimes like change the way you act just because you know that they're watching you and they're examining like what you're doing.
Right. Can you think, Kylie? Can you think of any example? How would you change your behavior if you know someone is observing you?
Um, I mean, if I knew somebody was observing me, or like how, if they were observing me, like how they walk on the street or something like that, maybe I would walk differently. Like I would walk, maybe a little slower. Um, uh, Someone might strut a little bit or do something like that. I was also thinking about like if a child knew that they were being observed, they may act more respectful or like calm down a little bit and like follow the rules more because they know that somebody's watching them and they could get rewarded for that or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. So yeah, it's everywhere. Like, so imagine if, yeah, we're interested to see how do people eat. Then we go to install a camera, or like cameras like in the dining hall, or like someone would just visit for Thanksgiving and want to see like the habits around like Thanksgiving dinners. Obviously, yeah, most people will change the way they eat. That's just basic psychology. Like starting like from the portions, how fast they eat, like how big the bites are, like the thing they pick, the sound they make, right? Like this is endless. And if you could apply it to like how people walk, for instance, what people dress, obviously, yeah, if there's someone coming to a place and yeah, they were like, or like community or workplace, they're observing everyone. Yeah, you would tend to change something to change a few things or a lot of things to look in a like to be perceived in a favorable light, right? So that's a big like limitation, or how let's call it a threat to ethnographic research, that people do change their behavior when they know they're being observed. Um, the solution to that, however, is like you could argue that like the longer the period is, the less people would tend to fake it, so to speak, right? So yeah, you might change your behavior if you know it's being observed for like a week or two, but then as things progress and as you familiarize yourself with the observing researcher, you're actually going to revert back to your normal ways, right? Like you get more comfortable with being observed, you get more comfortable with the researcher, and so you will revert to acting more naturally. And so, but it's still something that researchers have to be aware of when they talk or when they conduct ethnographic research. Also, and there are like 2 points, which is like the validity of the research conclusion and ambiguity about the methods. That is to say, ethnographic research, more than anything, is based on what the researcher is telling us, what they observed, right? So in an interview, we could get the transcript, right, of the interview or video recording and check for ourselves. But ethnographic research is built on also field notes and what the researcher felt during that experience. And so we don't know for sure when the researcher tell us that this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. We as readers have no way of validating that or like checking the accuracy of the information. So that's one limitation more peculiar to ethnographic research than other methods. Um, Also, and it's related to that, is the idea that it's less, how to put it, it's less generalizable because whatever finding you read from ethnographic research, it's going to be subjective. Okay. And we say, and you know what subjective means, right? So it is informed and framed by the researcher's own perspective. When you go and conduct a research in Paris, and I'm telling you, yeah, tell us what you felt, what you saw, what you observed, what you've experienced. It's going to be, all of these reports are going to be shaped by your own experience, by your own background, by your own biases and assumptions and looks and all of that. And it's really hard to when because it's an engaging or like participating act of the research. It's really hard to separate the experience, the subjective experience, from the observed reality, because you would be getting the reality through the lenses of that particular ethnographic research. And so, yeah, whether we're talking about street vendors in New York or like restaurant goers in Paris, or I don't know, like the bodega store owners in Manhattan, it's always going. All of these things going to be all of these ethnographic reports going to be shaped by the researcher's experience. And because of that, ethnographic research results are not generalizable. And we're going to talk about sampling in a few slides actually after this. That is to say, when you're running ethnographic research, the one we saw, let's say, looking at how people in some Indonesian village, or like old women in some Indonesian village, use washing machines. The results that you're going to report are peculiar or unique to that specific environment, but it doesn't tell us about the population of washing machine users in Indonesia or in any other country for that matter, right? Because it's very peculiar to one environment and few individuals. Uh, the depth, I mean, you would go into with the ethnographic research. And so for that, we would say it's not generalizable, even if they're valid. So it's assuming everything that the researcher is reporting is accurate, there would still be unique to that community. But we say, as I said before, we look at similar studies or like similar ethnographic research in different places and see if there are similarities, right? So the immigrant community in, let's say, San Diego, like the immigrant community in like San Antonio, and maybe the immigrant community in like New Jersey. How are they similar or different? Well, we cannot tell, but each individual study, if they are conducting in all of these three communities, if we compare them and see some similarities, those similarities could be generalized. But no single study could give us generalizable results. So that's the issue with ethnographic research. So that's for this part about ethnographic research. Do you have questions? Okay, so now I'm just going to spend 10 minutes talking about sampling, and then there will be another like 15-minute video that I'm going to post later this afternoon. So let me share the other Okay. Okay. So so we're going to talk about sampling later. So I think we've explained this. Do you know what sampling mean? What does a sample means? Sampling, sample, I sampled. Any idea? So forget about research. When someone say I sampled something, what do they mean? Or I got a sample.
It could mean like getting an idea of a smaller percentage of something in order to make inferences about the larger group as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. So for example, you go to like an ice cream shop and you get a sample, right? So you get one flavor, and that should talk about like the quality of the ice cream in that shop, right? So that will mean sample. So sampling means selection. That's like the easiest way. But in research, it means particularly selecting members of the population to be included in your study. That's what sample means, right? So when we say you're going to sample for a focus group about the satisfaction of students with like remote learning, obviously we cannot interview all of the students in San Diego, the University of San Diego, or even the one college for that matter. And so you're saying, okay, we're going to select a few members to participate in a study, hoping that those results of researching or investigating those members would say something about the larger population. That's what sampling. Like sample, you select. And we sample every day. So when you sample songs to be included in a playlist, right? You'd be saying, okay, those songs represent, for example, the best of Taylor Swift or whatever, whoever your favorite singer or like artist is, right? So sample is saying, yeah, this represents something larger than the particular songs, right? And it could be selected by you, or it could be selected by someone else. Um, so so we say, okay, sampling is meant to represent something about population. So look at this image right here in the slides. Do you think this guy has gotten the right sample?
No, because there's a lot more green in the bowl, and he only has one in his hand. So to make it like the right sample, you would need probably a larger amount of the green, like an equal amount of the red and the green.
Yeah, so you need like more like equal amount of green, so the sample would be proportionate. And so we say he didn't get the right sample because we see like just by looking like eyeballing it, it looks like there's like an equal number of green balls and red balls, but then he got like a disproportionate number of red balls and only one green. Could you? Here's another question. Could you, by chance, just by mere chance, let's say here we have like let's say like 200 ball. Let's say just for example. And could you, by mere chance, just get your hands in and like pick one ball at a time? and by mere chance you could end up with 9 red balls and 1 green ball. Could that happen? Just by accident? Yes, no?
It probably could be possible, just not very likely that that would happen.
Yeah, but the idea is, yeah, it could happen. Then another question, could it then be that you would get, what's the likelihood that you would get like an equal number, like 10 red balls and 10 green balls? Is that likely or less likely? Highly likely or less likely? Out of 200.
I mean, I'd say a little bit more likely that could happen.
Yeah. So that, the right answer is it depends. And so it depends if you're making like the efforts, if you're selecting consciously or unconsciously from that ball. And so that's what we would call sampling, and we can get type of sampling. Some clarification here. So when we say a population in research, and this is very important, the population means we're talking about these subject of or like object of research that are related to your research subject or your topic. So in other words, if I am interested in the performance of student athletes uh, under or like amidst the COVID-19 restrictions, my population is solely represented by college, solely composed of college athletes. Does not include college students, doesn't include professional athletes or amateur athletes. It's only interested in college athletes. Those are going to be my population, all right? If you're interested in like the performance of students, your population is going to be only college students, right? And the same thing when we study, like example, you're doing content analysis on like artwork in the Museum of San Diego or like Fine Art Museum of San Diego, then those artworks will be your population. So population could mean people, could mean objects, could mean organizations, could mean countries. All of them, if they are the subject of your research, will be called the population. Sometimes in some papers, they would be referred to as the universe. So the universe of all possible participants that can, or like a population that could be part of your study. And sometimes it's called population, as we said. And this, how do you define the population? It depends on the researcher in the research question. So there is no one population, there are different populations, and they are defined of what your research question you're interested in, like people in general. So you're doing like, for example, a psychological research, looking at psychological traits. As the population would be all human beings, or you're interested in the behavior of adolescents, all people, different demographic groups, etc. So that's what we would call a population. Right? When you study everyone in the population, we call that a census. So when do we use the word census? Census. When do you hear that word? Census.
Once every 10 years.
Once every 10 years. And who does that? Who conducts the census?
The government, the
Yes.
federal government.
Yeah. So we have the census with a capital C, and it's supposedly a work done by the federal government, everything is, and supposedly it aims to capture, or let me say, survey or report every single individual living in the United States, right? That's at least the goal. So it's not a sample, it's all of the population is included. That's the most famous census we know of, right? Or like a regular person knows of. But any study that covers all member of the population is called a census, right? When you do a census, you will get a maximum or a full external reliability, or what we would call generalizability. That is to say, the results in your study accurately reflect the value or the reality of the population. So, for instance, I am interested, let's say, on how my class is satisfied with remote learning. So my population is only composed of my class. I can draw just a sample of you, so I could interview 5 of you and see how satisfied are you with the online class. Or I could interview all of you and see how satisfied are you. But which one would give me a more accurate reflection of how satisfied are you with the class? Just talking to 5 people or talking to all of you? So you see, so I'm getting a sample of 5, and the results technically could be generalized, but it's better to talk to everyone, right? If that's, yeah, whatever the population, whatever the study is true of the population. However, we cannot do that. Therefore, for many reasons, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. It's not even feasible to analyze the data. So you could imagine, for instance, so remember the paper that discussed like fitness images? Remember that? Or thin ideal images? And so if that study wanted to study the population and conduct a census, that means every fitness image on the internet had to be analyzed. Imagine every single fitness image or thin or like fitness ideal image on the internet have to be analyzed. No one can conduct that research. If you're doing let's say advertising research about let's say Nike, everyone who watched the ad has to participate in order to give you like a full census data. That's not possible at all. So that's lack of resources, lack of feasibility, and even like overwhelming data. You cannot. How are you going to manage responses by 1 million people, or 100 million, or like 200 million? That's not even possible. Therefore, because it's not, although it's preferable ideally, but it's not possible, we would do what we would call sampling. And the idea is, because we cannot do a census, we're going to get like a segment of that population, study it, and the results from studying that segment could be applied or inferred or generalized to that population, right? There are 2 ways to do that. One is called probability sampling. The other is called non-probability sampling. Probability sampling means it's probable that everyone in the population would be represented in the sample. Non-probability sampling, you could guess, that means it's improbable or less probable for everyone to be included in the sample. And so we're going to talk, so we're going to stop now. And we're going to continue talking about this on Monday. And I'm going to make a short video again. I'm going to post only for like 10 minutes, 10-ish minutes, talk about probability sampling, and then we'll continue on Monday. And so do you have any questions? Okay, so if that's the case, then have a good one, and I hope to see you next time.